In this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different for me. I'm going to review a new board game that's all about using your baseball cards. Come with me and let me tell you all about this new game. What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me back on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. I've never done something like this before. I had somebody reach out to me, this guy named Matthew, reached out over email and asked me if I'd be willing to review a board game that his 8-year-old son Garrett invented. They made this board game out of their home, I'm guessing, and he asked me, can I send you a copy? You try it out with your kids, give a review, let me know how it goes. They market it as something where you can actually use your baseball cards to play the game. And I found out that's exactly what it is. It was a great board game, let me tell you that right off the bat. Highly recommend, a lot of fun. Check it out. But here I'm going to get into the details and tell you a little bit about that game. The game is called Baseball Card GM, and it's super simple to find it, baseballcardgm.com. When you do go and look on that website, I did see a message that said that there's only 550 copies that have created so far. You know, a little bit of a starter to see how it goes, how well it's received before you start making a lot more orders of materials, right? If you're interested, go check it out. I don't know how long they're going to last. I don't know how well it's selling already, but you do see on the website too that there's lots of reviews already, a lot of different YouTube channels, but not so many about the baseball card hobby area. It's more about, you know, game reviewers. So he reached out to me, I think, because of that kind of crossover to actually starting to get the word out to people that collect and love baseball cards. I've got the box here, Baseball Card GM, that's where it came from. And then I'll just show you real quick. You know, I'm going to do most of this in pictures, but I figured I'd give you an idea of what the game actually looks like. Here's the game mat. So, you know, it's fairly large, it's pretty good size, and it's easy to read. So you just lay this out on the table and you get going. Now, I will say I'm not going to dive too deeply into the gameplay itself. I'll cover it on a pretty high level just to be able to get the point across of what it's all about. But I wanted to spend more time, you know, with my observations to actually talk about what I noticed about playing the game and how much fun we had doing it and all the little nuances of it that use baseball cards and the stats on the back of those baseball cards, which is what makes this game totally different from all the other ones you might see. There are other games I've played. We actually own one that's all about putting a lineup together, rolling the dice, see if you get a hit, get a walk, out, strike out, whatever. And it's all based on chance, based on the roll of the dice. So it doesn't really matter who your players are. But the purpose of this game is to let you choose the cards that you want to play with, the players that you want to play with, the year of the cards that you want to play with. And it's all based off of the stats on the back of that card. You can play it in lots of different ways, but the way we did it was the most simple, the last year of stats, but you can choose almost anything based on what you want to do. First off, you build a lineup, making sure that you filled all the different defensive positions. So again, this can be as true as you want to the game, but we decided we might as well make it as true as possible. So an infielder for every position, catcher, pitcher, 3 outfielders. We didn't worry about, you know, what position those outfielders played in the outfield, just that we had 3 outfielders. So like I said, as complex or as simple as you wanted to get. We did pick a couple different pitchers just to be able to finish up the game. The pitchers don't impact the game nearly as much. It's still very much an offensive oriented game of chance sort of thing, but they did make it in a way so that the pitchers do have an impact of sorts on the gameplay, and that kind of makes it cool. It adds an extra level. Now you can fill up your lineup any way that you want, but what I did for the kids, they're the ones that played the game, I went through my 1991 Fleer, those great yellow ugly looking cards from way back. That's like 35 years old now. And I made sure to pick position players, at least 3 from each position, and I had them draft back and forth. So the first one up got to look through all the position players, pick the player that they want the most, and then the second gets to look through all the positions and pick the second player. And they go back and forth until they filled out a complete roster of every defensive position out there. But once we put the lineups together, that's when the game begins. So for gameplay, it is relatively simple. You just roll the dice, and based on the number number combination you get, you look in the bottom corner of your game mat to see what the outcome might be. The number combinations on the dice are divided up based on stat headings. So these are the stats that you actually have to look on the back of the card to see what that player's stats were in the previous year. And that's how you figure out what happens to that batter. Some of them are really tough, like triples obviously are going to be really hard to hit. Home runs a little less so, singles and walks much easier, and all the different types of outs. If a player hits above a certain threshold, let's say 40 home runs or 15 home runs, I think are the two kind of home run categories, then they might get a variety of outcomes. So you're combining the combination of the dice with the stats on the back of the card. Depending on those stats, they might be out in a variety of ways. They might get a walk, a base hit, a single, double, triple, home run. And the types of outs actually do matter too. That's one really cool thing that they developed about this game, is they made it so if you strike out, then your bat's over. If you hit a ground out, you might ground into a double play, depending on if there's a force route or not. And if there's a pop fly, you pretty much get out. But if there's a fly out, then you might have the chance to tag up a runner if there's less than 2 outs. So those little nuances have actually made the gameplay a little bit more in depth than you would typically see for some of these games. But like I said, there are some ways in which the game has expanded a little bit to include more than just hitting. First off, there's the pitchers. Pitchers are not all that prominent in the game, but they can make a difference at times. Essentially, if a pitcher is in that upper echelon, they have a really low ERA, or they won or saved a lot of games the year before, then there's an adjustment that you apply to the numbers in those boxes with the different number combinations for dice that you roll. And as a result, those adjustments make it that much harder for the batter to reach base safely. And on top of it, they did add in the lefty versus lefty or righty versus righty matchups as well, making it a little bit more complex. And I must say a little bit daunting at the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, it actually doesn't come up all that often where the pitcher makes a difference. And you use it a couple times, it becomes pretty obvious, even for kids to be able to figure out. And having that lefty on lefty or righty on righty matchup makes it that much more realistic and true to the game of baseball, which I thought was really cool. There's also a way to limit the number of innings that a certain pitcher can pitch based on the total innings that they pitched in their previous season. So starters that logged a lot of innings can go up to 7 innings, but relief pitchers may only be able to pitch 1 inning, while middle guys can go for 5. That makes it so you actually have to change your pitcher out every once in a while, which is another cool added layer. In addition to the rolling of the dice for all this hitting and then the adjustments made by the pitcher you have, there's also another layer that's been added. If you get on base safely, you can steal bases based on how fast your player on base is. You can choose whenever you want to try to steal a base, and you roll the dice against a rising scale based on how many stolen bases your player had in the previous season as well. Unfortunately, you can't incorporate any defensive stats, like the defensive prowess of your catcher, because they don't include defensive stats on the back of baseball cards. And that is part of what makes this game necessarily focused on the offensive side, but they have worked really hard to try to incorporate the pitching and the base running aspects. So, the overall gameplay. One team essentially keeps on rolling until they've reached 3 outs, scoring as many runs as you can in that time period. And then you switch sides, and you go back and forth just like a regular baseball game until 9 innings are played and a winner comes out on top. Or you have to go to extra innings. Our first game ended in a score of 4-2, making it quite realistic actually in terms of real baseball scores you might see. And in fact, Matthew, when he reached out to me, he told me a lot of work went into the game setup in terms of the odds to make sure that each category was actually reasonably representative of real life. So essentially, singles, doubles, triples, and home runs should occur in the game about as often as you would see in a real baseball game when the numbers all average out. We didn't have a home run in our game, but that's partly because Mark Grace only hit 12 home runs in 1990. And when we rolled the dice, Jasmine needed 15 home runs to be able to hit that home run in the game. Just didn't quite happen. So that is a quick rundown of just how to play the game. Once you've played it once, it's super easy to pick up and play again. And here is my review. The bottom line, if you've got kids that love baseball, or you'd like to share the love of the game of baseball with them more, this game is wonderful for them. I can't rave enough about how great it was and how much my kids actually enjoyed it. And even if you don't have kids, this would actually be a great game to play as an adult if you love the game of baseball. I could totally see this game being picked up and played at local card shops. You see a lot of those guys sitting in the back of card shops playing TCG, Pokemon, Magic, whatever it is. I've never really got into that stuff, but I could totally see myself sitting down with some friends and playing this baseball game with some common baseball cards in the back of the room and see who wins. You could come up with full tournaments about this kind of stuff. And the best thing about it is you get to use your baseball cards. No more of that just throwing all the base cards away and looking for the shiny stuff, or even back in the day, the junk wax era, which is what we used. That stuff is all just garbage a lot of the time. But this is a way we can actually put it to use instead of putting all those base cards in a storage or junk box never to be seen again. This game could actually make collecting baseball cards for the sake of collecting instead of just investing cool again. My kids love watching baseball, following baseball, especially my daughter Jasmine. But I realized when I pulled this game out that even though they've opened boxes with me, they've looked through making sets together with me of complete sets of junk wax era cards, they've never really seen these cards as more than a picture on the front and a name or a number on the back of the card. As a kid, I pored over stats on the back of these cards or in newspapers. This is where I learned so much about the game of baseball and about who had great seasons, who were the best players, and who wasn't. It actually meant something to study the backs of these cards. And that's what this game does for kids. With every roll of the dice, you actually have to flip the card over and look at the player's stats from the previous season. You actually have to know who's good at what and who isn't. And in that way, you learn about the players, not just the stars of the game, but anybody that might be playing in the game at that time. For example, my kids learned that very few players hit over 9 triples in a season, but Tony Gwynn did hit 10 in 1990. They also found out when they drafted that famous players like Ozzie Smith might be a great name, a great Hall of Famer, but when it comes to a game like this, his hitting stats just aren't on par with a lot of the other shortstops that may not be as big of a name, but they were bigger hitters than Smith was. And so a guy like Ozzie Smith may not translate into this game, but it teaches them a little bit about the different aspects of the game and how some players are better at one thing than others. It also got them to understand the lineup process a bit more. And you can have bench players as well. So you can have substitutes, pinch runners, pinch hitters, if you want a better chance at a certain part of the game when your lineup is at the bottom of the order. But if you want to be serious about the game, you have to pay attention to the positions. Substitutions have to make sense. If you put in a speedy outfielder for your catcher, you've got to have a backup catcher to be able to defensively slot in at the bottom of your inning. There are so many different ways that you could approach building a lineup and playing this game. One of the messages from Matthew, and I totally understand after playing it once, is that the game is best played with cards 1981 and after. That was because a lot of the traditional stats that we use weren't put on the backs of baseball cards prior to 1980. So if you want to be able to use all the different parts of what's on the game board, you really have to look at 1981 and after. And you could play any way that you want with this. What if somebody had a down year? You'd be able to look on the back and know that this may not be the year. What if you're playing with cards that were at the end of a Hall of Famer's career or at the very beginning? They may not have the stats that you would expect from that specific year. And that's how this game can be made so dynamic. It's pretty amazing. You could look through a pile of cards and choose to pick all the best players available. Or you could actually play more true to reality. You could go through 91 Fleer, for example, is all separated by team. So you could go with the 1991 Fleer Oakland Athletics roster against the 1991 Fleer Cincinnati Reds roster in a reenactment of the World Series from 1990. How amazing would that be? Or you can open up some brand new packs and just the luck of the draw, open up enough packs to be able to fill out a defensive roster, and you have to be forced to play with what you got. If you really wanted to get into this game, I could totally see leagues being made where you can go with a given team in a given year. Maybe you could trade players among each other. You could play with a roster of 25 and actually play bench players, platoon shifts, things like that. But it could be a lot of fun to see among a group of friends who would actually be able to win the division by the end of the year. Just a thought that occurred to me. It's probably more than most people would get into, but I can also imagine there's some people that would dive deep into something like this. I will say, though, that if you decide to use kind of a realistic roster, the team approach, and you pick a team that was not great in the given year that you're using cards from, it might be hard to do much of anything. If you play a lot of role players, replacement level players, you're not likely to get many base hits, walks, home runs, definitely. So it's going to be harder and harder to actually win if you play more true to what a Major League roster would look like. But if you put a team together of a bunch of stars, it's going to be much easier to score runs. So there's my review. Like I said, go out and buy this game if you're interested. Highly recommend it. A few points of constructive feedback, and I'll send these to Matthew separately, but some of those boxes, when you roll the dice, they have the same outcome no matter what the stat is. And I'm sure that has something to do with them having to even out the odds of the outcomes. But it's a little bit disappointing, especially for the kids, when they roll a number combination. They see that it doesn't really matter what the back of the card says for stats. You're going to get struck out either way. So that is one thing that I would recommend changing if possible. But it does go to show that it was working. The game was working because the kids were really enjoying looking on the back of the card for the stats. And when they saw that it didn't matter, it kind of was a letdown. Another constructive feedback: it would be nice if pitchers could be used or more consequential a little bit more, but I can also understand that to do so would make it really complicated. Maybe there's a way of making more than just one tier of pitcher, or essentially two really good pitchers and everybody else. Maybe there's like 3 levels of pitchers. So just a thought process here, but I can understand that that could make things quite complex very quickly. Another small detail: I'd love to see double plays negated somehow. Right now, if you've got a force play and a batter hits a ground ball, that's an automatic double play. But we know that's not always the case. What if your batter stole a certain number of bases on the back of their card? Maybe they can leg out the run to first and avoid the double play. It would be a little interesting added nuance. You could even figure out a way to roll the dice to see what happens. And then the last thing, I would love to see something like sacrifice bunts added into this. You can choose to steal, but what if you can choose to sacrifice? It might be a bit more of a 50-50 shot whether the runner's safe or out, or just go off of how often bunts result in players moving up a base. But it would be kind of a fun little strategy item to see if you could add to the game. So those are just a couple different pointers, but overall, I highly recommend this game. Go check it out. At least go check out the website. Support a really young, huge baseball fan that went out of his way to invent something that could get a whole generation of kids more interested in their baseball cards, and especially the information that's on the back of those cards. Thanks for joining me today. In the meantime, keep talking baseball, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you around.